Thank you for coming in today. We're going to go over the Vineland report that we had for Peter back in, what was it, May the 31st. On that date, Peter was 4 years and 8 months. So let's start with the Vineland. Um, it refers to a typical performance of the day-to-day activities of the person that we're looking at. Okay, these scales, they assess what the person actually does rather than what he or she is able to do. So what he can do is what we're looking at. Okay, his overall adaptive behavior composite score was a 52. This means that he scores higher than only less than 1% of similarly aged individuals in the Vineland norming sample, which are kids. They compare him to kids his own age. So that was the standard score, which is all of the domains put together. So we're going to go over each domain. We have the communication domain, the daily living skills, the socialization, and the motor skills. We'll start with the communication, which has 3 subdomains: receptive, expressive, and written. Okay, so here we have in the communication domain, he scored low for his age group. Okay, his standard score was a 49, and what this means, his percentile rank is less than a 1. So this means that in this area, he's higher than or equal to only less than 1% of his peers in his age, for his age group, which is 4 years and 8 months. So he had an adaptive level of low for all 3 subdomains, which were the receptive, the expressive, and the written. In all 3 domains, he scored low. One was not higher than the other. And his age equivalents for the communication subdomains were 1 year and 2 months for the expressive and the written. And for the communication domains, it was 1 year and 2 months for the receptive domain, and 1 year for the expressive domain, and 1 year, 10 months for the written domain. So all of those together. So he scored relatively low in the communication domain.
So what does this mean?
Well, when we first started the interview, you had given me a little bit of background on Peter, and you told me that the pediatrician had told you that he possibly thought that Peter had PDD, a pervasive developmental disorder, being that he is already a 4-year-old and he's nonverbal. So these scores are pretty much in line for what we would see for, somebody with that type of disability. Let's move on. So we'll go on to his daily living skills. And the 3 subdomains that go into the daily living skills were the personal, domestic, and community. Okay, so his Peter standard score for the daily living skills in domain was 58. Okay, and this score represents a low level of adaptive functioning in this area for a child of his age. Okay, so his percentile rank for the daily living skills domain is less than 1. So he had an adaptive level of low for the personal subdomain, moderately low for the domestic subdomain, and low for the community domain. So his age equivalents for these were, for his daily living skills domains, they were 1 year and 10 months. The personal subdomain, 2 years and 2 months for the domestic domain, and 11 months for the community domain. So again, this is pretty much what we see with a child who has a disability such as a pervasive developmental disorder. And being that Peter is nonverbal, that's pretty much in line with it. So do you have any questions at this time?
No.
Okay, let's move on then. We'll go on to the socialization domain, and this has the interpersonal, play and leisure time, and coping skills. Okay, for the daily living skills domain, let's see, he scored a 58, and this score represents also a low level of adaptive functioning for a child of his age, 4 years and 8 months. His percentile rank for the daily living skills domain is less than 1, which again means that he scored less than 1% of kids his age. Okay. Okay, so he had an adaptive level of low for his personal subdomain, monetarily low for the domestic domain, and low for the community subdomain. Okay, Peter's age equivalents for the daily living skill subdomains were a year and 10 months for the personal subdomain, 2 years and 2 months for the domestic subdomain, and 11 months for the community subdomain. Do you have any questions so far?
No.
Okay, let's move on. So his level of adaptive functioning within the socialization domain, for that one, okay, for socialization, again, it was low for his age group. His standard score is a 57, which results in his percentile rank again is less than 1. His scores within the social subdomain indicate that his adaptive level is low for all 3 subdomains: the interpersonal, relationship, play and leisure time, and coping skills. His age equivalents for the socialization domains were 7 months for interpersonal relationship subdomain, 9 months for the play and leisure time subdomain, and 10 months for the coping skills subdomain. So he is relatively low for his age group. I mean, he's working at the months, not even the 1 year age. So let's go on to the motor skills. We did do the motor skills domain. He scored a 54, which also represents a low level of adaptive functioning for his age group. His percentile rank for this domain was also a less than 1. Okay, so he's also relatively low. For his age equivalents, the motor skills subdomains were a year and 5 months, and the gross motor skills subdomain, and 1 year and 5 months for the fine motor skills subdomain. Okay, so all of the domain standard scores were approximately the same. None was significantly higher or lower than the other. So therefore, none of the domains represented relative strength or weakness compared to his scores on the other domains. So there wasn't strengths and weaknesses that we could see from the Vineland. So a determination of whether or not Peter meets criteria for a child with an intellectual disability cannot be made at this time because there was no IQ score. So there will be further testing done on Peter to obtain IQ scores and get all the information that's needed to get a better picture of what's going on and how we can help Peter. Do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.